What's up, everyone? Before we jump into this, I just want to let you know that any articles or content that's referenced in this episode will be linked in the show notes below. These are strictly our thoughts and our general opinions. We more than invite you to leave us a comment or send us an email at daniel@hardknockstalks.com to expand on this conversation for future episodes. So let's get at it.
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
Good morning, Donna.
Good morning, Dan. Happy Saturday morning.
Happy Easter Saturday morning.
Yes.
Cattail. What a wild world we're currently living in right now.
Yep.
With the Sask party popping off about turning paraphernalia into weapons, and I don't know what the consequences for wielding such weapons would be. I don't know if that's yet to be determined. But
I honestly haven't taken a close enough look at the new legislation. I haven't had time.
Yeah. But with everything like around the compassionate intervention in Alberta and how it's forging forward and how it's being portrayed on different platforms, in the mainstream media. And then we have our friend Ewan over at Drug Data Decoded doing the best he can to disseminate knowledge, to transfer knowledge into ways that we can understand. It's really challenging.
Well, and there are, of course, the different lenses of that. And so he's coming at it with anything, there can be a wide range of perspectives on it.
Yeah.
And we have had you in studio, and we know that he tends to be opposite end of the spectrum of the conservatives. But yeah, I have questions and I have concerns on multiple fronts, and I feel like that there could potentially be a sort of happy medium, for lack of better terminology. We don't have to have the pendulum swing far left or far right. There needs to be a common ground. But
so our friend Dane Patterson from CBC News, he's been here in the studio. We've worked with him a few times. He just did an episode on, a release on CBC News Saskatchewan. I checked it out on YouTube this morning, walking around with, just want to make sure here, Sergeant Chris Harris. Sergeant Harris brought up some good talking points that I think we could definitely expand on, as far as housing and coercion. What does that even look like, or what could it look like? And I had to agree with him on a lot of fronts. He's talking about housing, and Mayor Block touched on that in that piece as well. They are building more housing, but if there's not the correct amount of support attached to that housing, it's just going to cause more problems. So
absolutely. Let's just pause for a second and put a little bit into perspective before we go too much further. Is like when I was coming off the street into recovery, certainly the approach that was practiced was the housing first component of things. However, I had 4 support workers that had different, focuses or specialties. And so I firmly believe that in order for the housing first approach to be successful, individuals would need those wraparound services, or we're just setting them up for failure, not unlike what Sergeant Harris discussed, But also, having been in front lines at a nonprofit, I feel very strongly that we do not have the manpower, the boots on the ground, to be able to provide that degree of wraparound service for every individual.
Yeah.
Nor would it be safe. So one of the first services that I was connected to was Prairie Harm, but almost simultaneous to that was Healthy Mom, Healthy Baby, and then in there, I was also connected to to prenatal care, and then from there, I was also connected to mental health and addictions, and trauma counseling. But previous to all of that, the Indian and Métis Friendship Center had a program called Home Fire. It was called Rapid Rehousing. And so they had been working with me, attempting to house me for at least a year.
Mm-hmm.
But none of those attempts were successful because I was still in active use and I was still very much connected to people who caused problems.
Mm-hmm.
So even if I had a desire and I had a capacity to maybe, distance myself from certain activities and certain substances and whatever, the people that were in my circle, that were in my orbit, often basically contributed to sabotaging my attempts.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that in front lines. We were supporting folks who, because of the nature of their family or the nature of their friend group, would consistently get sabotaged, and then they'd end up unhoused.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'd get them rehoused, and all those same people would come around, flail the place out, violence, destruction, all the things, unhoused.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in that same cycle. And the problem that I remember, like, especially in one of the last apartments that I had prior to that final transition, it was so overrun by gang members. I was so out of my league. I had no avenues, and the building management had no avenues. And so the only potential solution would be police involvement. But everybody knows when you're bumping shoulders with gang members, you don't bring the cops in.
Mm-hmm.
Because the cops are not going to protect you tomorrow. They may come in and clear house, but what happens tomorrow? And so you have no leverages or no mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
So the only solution that exists is eviction. And then the cycle just repeats and repeats and repeats.
Mm-hmm. So the concept or the tagline, housing first, to me, I mean,
it sounds great.
It sounds great, but I think the community, the broader community, and in particular, we've got the NIMBYs and the people that aren't attached to this lifestyle at all, that maybe do want to help.
Yeah.
They want to help.
Mm-hmm.
So they support these initiatives. This housing first. Oh, that sounds great. And then it doesn't work. And now the CBOs come under fire because it didn't work. Well, it's not like it's so much more complicated than that. And like Sergeant Harris said in that piece of content, like if you put someone who is unwell, like you just articulated, it's just the cycle is just going to continue, and then there's going to be harms to the community and more landlords who are now unwilling to participate in these programs.
Absolutely.
So he went on to say, though, and I'm paraphrasing now, so if he had his way, he would have all of these services available under one roof.
Yep.
And it would be coerced.
Yeah.
There would be people being forced into detox. Now, I can't say that I completely disagree with the prospect of coercion, and I would argue that coercion under the right circumstances for the right reasons could very, very well be compassionate.
Yeah.
And I have to agree with the language that, that the Alberta government is using with compassionate intervention.
Yeah.
Now, what does that look like? And is that going to be weaponized?
Yeah.
Right. You mentioned this morning when right before we decided to just come here and jump in the studio, like tell us about some of the things that you have seen, not necessarily working on the front line, but tell us about the incident that you saw when you were downtown the other day.
The two young ladies that were,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously office dwellers, as I like to call ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
but just on a lunch break, walking down the street, minding their own business, and somebody experiencing a mental health crisis of some variety, whether it was drug-induced or otherwise, became very animated in a threatening way, and it was hard to determine what direction that was going to go and whether or not I may have to intervene.
Mm-hmm.
And so the woman came stumbling towards them in an aggressive fashion, swearing and yelling and screaming profanities. And for these two young girls, it was very, very disturbing and probably, one could even argue potentially borderline traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how how inclined they're going to be to go down that street for lunch tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen situations, where like just sitting there and people have come stumbling out into traffic, swinging for the hills and swearing at all the cars, and and like people are almost getting run over by cars.
Mm-hmm.
And they're so in that psychotic break that they have absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm not in their brain, so I don't know what's actually transpiring, but it would seem to me that they have no real cognition that they are in the middle of traffic. Like whatever's happening for them,
Mm-hmm.
they're just angry and they're swinging at whatever,
Mm-hmm.
like for all I know, they think they're fighting a bear. And I'm not saying that in a way to like diminish what is happening for that individual. It's just, it becomes very dangerous for that person.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've seen this right at 20th and Idlewild. People are coming off the freeway at like 60 kilometers an hour, and I've seen people come staggering out. I would hate to see somebody hit.
Mm-hmm.
It's heartbreaking to me, and I've called it in, like not knowing what else to do. I have called, and I said, like, there's somebody having some complexities on the corner of here, and I really think that they need a health check.
Mm-hmm.
Please come. So, but what happens then?
Well, they likely get removed from the street for 24 hours, 48 hours, and get a ticket and a court date.
Is that not a compassionate intervention?
I agree. I think that it is, but this is where the complexities of all of that start
Right.
to come into place.
Yeah.
Like I agree. Like I've already mentioned, like I don't disagree that we need to have coercion as a part of our spectrum of care.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we can, and there's people in our communities that say that that's an infringement upon people's rights and things to that end. But what about and like you said, like what about the rights of those two young ladies that were walking downtown who deserve to be living in a community that is safe and that where all of the members are cared for in a respectful way? Now, is allowing these people to just wander the streets and have their complexities just on display to the broader community? I was just downtown last week. I walked out from a building, and there was a woman walking down the streets screaming at the walls.
Yeah.
I ran into some police officers. I forget the names downtown there. And I asked them, like, because the library shut down, because Prairie Harm had to shut down.
Yeah.
And I asked them, like, how have these streets downtown been since those shutdowns? And they said, we've seen a lot more traffic.
Absolutely.
A lot more.
Yeah.
So not supporting the needs of organizations like the libraries, like Prairie Harm Reduction, has further resulted in more of these complex needs just being turned loose on the community.
Yeah.
So when Sergeant Harris says things like we need coercion,
like he aptly pointed out, in my opinion, I feel like he aptly pointed out, a lot of folks, unfortunately, are just not in a space to be able to make rational decisions. And I can say that from my own lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
There were times when I was deep in my addiction, I was not able to make rational decisions.
Well, clearly.
And I was in very dangerous situations. And, and so there... And it's hard to articulate, because there were times even when like I was in that, like I had those sober moments, right, where I had made attempts, to reach out for support and services, and the barriers came up, but I was so desperate to get out of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
There were times where it was like, I wish that did exist, where somebody could just come and scoop me and stick me somewhere, and I would be out of that life, and I would be safe, and I would be getting the help that I needed.
Save me from myself.
Even my parents, they could see what was happening, and they were powerless. And there's Grady, our son, in their care, and I'm out there not functioning well and not capable of making the connections that I need to make, or whatever the case may be, And so, and on even in similarly to that, there's been folks that I have engaged with on the front lines that I remember a couple of us going to the ED and saying, like, is there anything that we can do? Are there any mechanisms legally that we can have this individual committed, because they are dangerous? Like, extremely dangerous and
Mhm.
experiencing, and we know for a fact that they had diagnoses, schizophrenia being one. And then you compound that with like substances like meth. So these extremely complex needs, and the couple of people that we were discussing were particularly violent.
Mhm.
What do we do with folks like that? Like, even if we put them in a housing situation and get wraparound services, I feel like we're putting people in danger, extreme danger. So, in those extreme cases, perhaps, unfortunately, the best method or best avenue would be the compassionate intervention that we're talking about. And from my understanding of that act, that is the sort of, for lack of a better word, target individual.
Mhm. I mean, I have to agree. There is a place for compassion in a way that will remove someone from their ability to act on their impulses
Yeah.
until the fog can clear, so to
Till the
speak.
fog can clear. Absolutely.
You know, whether that's a week or a month, or if like, where does the line to their rights end when they're not in any shape to make those decisions, to exercise those rights properly?
I remember being a part of a working group where we were talking about this concept of like a hub, and I would say 80 to 90% of the participants on that panel saw the sense in having this centralized hub.
Mm-hmm.
There was maybe 10 to 15% participants that were not in favor of that approach, because then you're infringing upon the rights of people who may, why should we force everybody to go to one place? Like, we need to honor what their choice or pathway is. And I get that. However, in that sort of position, I feel like we are taking away the rights of the majority
Who would use that?
who would use that. And I certainly, when I was trying to navigate those very, very complicated systems in psychosis, in mental health, like, it was overly complicated. And yet there was that expectation that I should be able to do it,
Mm-hmm.
And then support workers, there aren't enough support workers. And then for the support workers that are accessible, the caseloads that they're handling are so massive. And then we have all these little patchwork things of supports.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I could not keep track of all the different avenues and different organizations who had this little thing on Tuesday from 1 till 3. And then this place over here had something on Mondays from 10 till 12.
Mm-hmm.
How do you keep track of that?
Yeah.
For 40, 50 people. Like, it's unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
So to have everything under one roof,
Mm-hmm.
would make it so much easier. And then on top of that, I have heard the argument used so many times that it's the concern of sharing of information, but at the same time, we hear these same people saying that the client shouldn't have to repeat their story multiple times over. So how are we going to achieve that without sharing information?
Mm-hmm.
Something's got to give. And I feel like on so many fronts, both sides have dug their heels in so deep that they refuse to see that middle ground.
Yeah.
And I get both. Like, I do. I honestly, truly understand both sides of that coin.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, there has to be a meeting somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or we're just going to continue in this mess that we're in.
Yeah. If you want to join this conversation, feel free to send me a voice note or an email, Daniel@hardknockstalks.com. we really should be doing these things more often. This is just our 2 cents. Like I said, we do our best to not dig our heels in to what we definitely disagree and don't disagree with, because like you said, and I see it too. I see both sides of the coin.
Yeah.
Like I definitely see a need for a very diverse and broad spectrum of care.
Well, and if I may, I'm not Indigenous, clearly, but I definitely can understand the particularly strong hesitancy from the Indigenous community, given the historical events, and I might also add, when we talk about, infringement on the rights of folks who are experiencing mental health complexities, because I mean, look what happened when we had asylums. Like nothing historically good has come from institutions, unfortunately.
Other than
These
people who were having these complexities weren't just turned loose on the public.
That's true.
So,
yes.
Not to say that what happens in these institutions is all good and not traumatic.
Yes.
However, the other side of the coin is we don't have these things happening in downtown Saskatoon.
Fair.
If it's similar to the carceral system, where you can be scooped and properly assessed and prescribed a modality of treatment that is very likely to work for you, and then above that or beyond that, when you have completed this modality of care, whatever that looks like, then you are properly supported back into the community, into affordable housing that is supported.
Yeah.
I think that will work for some people.
Yes.
Now, some, right? Now, that won't work for everyone. Like, very much when you and I came into recovery, like, I needed a kick in the ass. You needed a hug. Okay? We need that diverse spectrum of care. And I believe that will work for some people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So to just say that, no, we're going to infringe on people's rights, so we can't, like, what about the rights of the broader community? Having these people running around downtown unable to access any kind of services or find any kind of wellness in any kind of way. I mean, that's not fair to them.
That's not fair to them at all.
No. That's infringing on their rights. Like, where's the right to a safe community? That includes up here.
Yes.
I would think.
Yeah.
So just by letting them run off, I think that's an infringement on their rights.
Yeah.
So anyways, like I said, these are all just our own opinions.
I don't even know if they're fully formed opinions so much as this is just a spitballing of, like, this is our understanding at this moment in time. Like,
Yeah. Well, and honestly, this is just a conversation, because our mandate on this platform is to foster productive conversations about substance use.
Yeah.
Here are our thoughts. Please feel free to drop a comment. Tell us how you feel. We're not here to say that it should be this or that. We're just trying to produce conversations that have the ability to bring some healing to our community. Because the sound bites and the mudslinging that's going on in our media by our politicians sometimes is just, it's gross, and it's not productive. It's fear-mongering.
Yeah. There's a lot of fear-mongering happening.
And cherry-picking of information, getting half-truths.
Yeah.
So this is us just trying to...
I believe they call that torquing. There was
Working?
Not twerking. Torquing.
Okay.
There was one of the articles that kind of incited this conversation was the fact that, the one particular word used was indefinite.
Yes.
And that was controversial to us.
Now, let's unpack that. What do you mean? What was said?
Well, it was suggested that people would be arbitrarily detained for an indefinite amount of time. Like, it sounds like they're being sent to Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, and held forever.
Held forever, and there'll be no courts or assessments or anything. It's just they're just gonna scoop people off the street and throw them into whatever holding cell or whatever the case may be. But
like the word indefinitely.
The word indefinite is problematic. The only reason it's indefinite is because nobody's recovery is the same. Nobody, like, what could work for somebody in 1 month, it may take 6 months for another individual. And that's, I think, all that word is meant to imply in its original form. But in the article, it is weaponized to create that fear, to create that resistance. Oh my God, we can't put people anywhere for an indefinite amount of time and there would be no court process and all this. That's not entirely true, because what is actually the mechanisms that exist is that family, law enforcement, healthcare workers, or what did I say? Yeah. Law enforcement, healthcare workers, or family members can initiate an assessment of an individual.
Thank God.
If I wish my parents had been able to do this, it would have saved me.
Yeah. Indefinite means lasting for an unknown or unstated length of time. That's all that means. That could be 2 weeks. That could be 2 months.
Yep.
You know, we don't know how long it's going to take for the light bulb to come on.
Yeah. When we say indefinite in that sort of context, it definitely sounds like we're just going to pick people up and God knows when we'll see them again, if ever.
Yeah.
That's not accurate.
Yeah.
That's not accurate. Stop that.
Yeah. I love you.
I love you too.
I love it when you get the fire in your eyes. So, okay. Anything else? Let me just do a Google here.
So then when we look at this involuntary detention and treatment component of this act, it states that the individual can be detained without consent and taken to a facility for medical or psychiatric evaluation. If a physician confirms eligibility, the person can be held for up to 72 hours, extendable with court approval. It says it right there. You know, now we do know that sometimes the other side spins things to make it sound like they've got all their ducks in a row and everything's going to go tickety-boo and it's just going to be beautiful, right? That hasn't always been the case either. So I don't blame people for having their guard up. And absolutely, we need to hold people to account. We need to make sure that the systems and processes actually do work. So that, I think, is where the focus should be, as opposed to this absolute fear-mongering. Let's have productive conversations of what does this look like? Instead of just resist.
Yeah.
No. Let's look at it objectively. Can we make it work? Can they make it work? You know, one of the big question marks right now is are there facilities, are there enough beds and facilities to actually implement this? So, in Saskatchewan, no.
And even
not
with,
yet.
Yeah. And even with all of the beds that are, like now the 60 beds in Lumsden are open, those are not equipped to handle coerced treatment strategies, I don't think.
Well, and here's another layer to the complexity of all the things. Is folks that have convictions for sexual assaults are not eligible.
For what?
For almost any treatment beds. That's a significant barrier.
Yeah.
Yeah. We faced that multiple times in the frontline work that I was doing. There was literally nowhere for these folks to go, even when they were ready, even when they wanted to go. But they had sexual assault charges in their history.
Which is not good. However.
No, and I think it's unreasonable. Especially if it's a dated charge and there hasn't been any refenses, you know, to still hold that against an individual from getting the help that they need. So one other area that we haven't talked about is the youth element of it. There are youth provisions that youth may be detained and assessed under similar criteria. And governments argue that this is to provide early intervention and support, especially for at-risk or homeless youth.
I think that there's a lot of parents out there who will be so relieved. Relieved.
We have interviewed a few parents who felt completely powerless
Yeah,
to help their child.
we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they turn to the police, and the police can't do anything. They just have to
Can't do
sit there and watch their child die on the street.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, we say very little with a tone of finality in this conversation.
Yeah.
We too are seeking answers,
Yes.
right? We do want to find where the best treatments are, what the best treatments look like with the diversity that this province needs. So, again, having said that, send me an email, Daniel@hardknockstalks.com. Leave us a comment. If you're not yet subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. That really helps us get our message out there. Turn on notifications. And I guess that's it for now. Okay. It's been a slice.
As always.
Okay.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.